Welcome to the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. I'm your host, registered dietitian and kidney stone expert, Melanie Betts. After learning a ton about kidney stones and helping people prevent stones at the University of Chicago, I was fed up with all the terrible advice people were finding online. So I decided to do something about it. The Kidney Dietitian was born. This podcast is for people who want to learn what actually works to prevent kidney stones and still enjoy life, eating, and their favorite foods. Let's dive in. Welcome to the 117th episode of the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. I'm Melanie, of course, your host, and I could not be more excited to welcome today's guest, Dr. Kris Penniston, to the podcast. I cannot say enough amazing things about the work that Kris has done for nutrition and kidney stones. She truly is one of my ultimate mentors. Certainly when you think about nutrition, kidney stone mentors, she is one of my all-time mentors when it comes to kidney stones. She has a PhD and works at the University of Madison, Wisconsin, and has truly dedicated her essentially entire career to kidney stone nutrition and kidney stone prevention and how that impacts quality of life and effective methods and that sort of thing. She also works in the kidney stone clinic at the University of Wisconsin Hospital. She truly has gained international attention. Last year, she got a presidential award at the American Urological Association for her work in kidney stone nutrition. If you Google Kristina Penniston, you will find multiple papers that she has published, all of her research really diving into, like I mentioned, kidney stone prevention and nutrition. She is a co-author on the official guidelines for kidney stone prevention from the American Urological Association. So she really is the true big deal when it comes to kidney stone nutrition. So with that, please welcome Kris to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. As always, I'm your host, registered dietitian and kidney stone expert, Melanie Betts, and I am thrilled to have my very favorite fellow kidney stone dietitian and researcher on the podcast today, Kristina Penniston. So Kris, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and share a little bit about yourself with the audience?
Sure. Thanks for asking me to join you today. It's always a pleasure to talk with fellow dietitians who understand gut physiology and, all those things that we like to talk about. So I am a scientist at the Department of Urology at the School of Medicine at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm also a clinician, so I'm a clinician scientist. I am a registered dietitian, and I've been practicing now 26 years in clinical practice. Hard to believe.
Goes fast.
And I joined the Department of Urology at UW-Madison 20 years ago this summer. So my research has focused on kidney stones for the most part, and nutrition. I have done all different kinds of research. I've done basic science, I've done animal experiments, I've done a little epidemiology, and a lot of clinical studies. So mostly not randomized clinical trials, but clinical studies in that, you might look at patients who are given one set of information versus another, or in one case right now I'm doing a magnesium supplement study, testing whether different magnesium supplements formulations have different abilities to raise your own magnesium. So that's kind of where my career has been. I've done a little bit of other research too. So my department chair and I developed a quality of life instrument for patients with kidney stones. It was the first ever. There's been others since developed, but we were surprised when knowing how bothersome kidney stones are to some people and life-changing for some, that there wasn't an instrument. So, learned what we needed to learn to get an instrument going, get the focus groups going, listening to patients, validating the instrument. But it's very useful. And I do think quality of life is a concern for dietitians. I do think that in our practices, we should be incorporating patient preferences and quality of life in what we do. So anyway, I've had the great pleasure of being a clinician scientist all these years and getting to combine the clinical practice, which I don't do very much of. A few hours a week, it's enough to keep me sharp, but not ready to do it full time these days. So anyway, that's my background.
Yeah, that's such a great mix of things because it kind of keeps you grounded in like real life when you see patients versus, people who kind of live in research world. You kind of lose touch, I think, sometimes with what real people and what it's like to be a person living with kidney stones or whatever it might be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I got my PhD at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in nutritional sciences. So I've kind of just stayed in the Madison area, which is where I am now, of course, and turned out to be really a great place. The
Yeah.
department chair of urology here is a stone surgeon himself. Not all department chairmen of urology are. So he had that kind of on his mind. And it's just been a really great place to be and have been really rewarded by urologists who are actually, frankly, interested in learning about
Yeah.
nutrition and prevention of stones.
Yeah. And kidney stones at all, but
Yeah,
especially the prevention and nutrition of kidney stones.
right.
Yes. Yes. Um, this question is a little bit out of left field, but I feel like it might be relevant, especially in a time where research and science is sort of under attack. I will go out on a limb and say, not so much on a limb. I wonder if you can give a little bit of insight to an audience of people who are likely not mostly researchers about why research and kidney stones is so important. Can you kind of help us understand, especially since you've had experience doing clinical research, which is for the audience kind of like research that's involving real people living in the real world, living with kidney stones and kind of understanding what makes their life better or what makes kidney stone prevention worth better, all the way down to, sort of cell biology and sort of understanding what's happening at like a test tube level, right? So, there's so many different types of research, but in a very broad sense, can you help us understand why research and following and understanding the research is so, so critical, specifically when it comes to kidney stones?
Yeah. Well, and what you say is true. This is a very precarious time. I am funded right now by the NIH, and I just got a renewal, but it was scary for a while because none of us really knew if things were going to move forward. And the program officers at NIH, kind of on a day-to-day basis, were not knowing what was going on. So it's really hard. And I think it's really hard on trainees and students, grad students, and younger, earlier stage investigators who are wondering, is this a career I can make a lifetime out of? Because
Mhm.
anyway. But the reason I think that research for kidney stones in particular is so important is that surprisingly, we know very little about how and why they form. And I say surprising because about as many people have kidney stones as do diabetes. And we
I
all
say
hear
that
about
all the
diabetes.
time. That's a
Yeah,
talking point I use.
we all hear
Yeah.
about diabetes every day. We
Hmm.
hear about
Hmm.
diabetes and how bothersome it is, and how dangerous it is, and different treatments, and understandably it's gotten a lot of attention, but kidney stones, although it's just as prevalent, haven't really gotten that. And I think it's because kidney stones present differently in individuals. So
Hmm.
some individuals develop the worst possible side effects or outcomes, urosepsis, or even the need for kidney removal
Hmm.
after kidney stones. Others can just kind of breeze through them. But the reason to do research is because we don't know why there's differences like that.
Hmm.
We don't know what makes someone form necessarily. Although we know what the risk factors are, we don't really know at a deep down level why someone forms calcium monohydrate versus dihydrate stones, or why someone forms a brushite stone, which is it's harder to break up with typical surgical techniques, and more likely to recur versus another form of calcium phosphate stone. So we don't know why there's a difference. We also don't know why certain people form stones and others don't.
Hmm.
You can have two people exposed to the same conditions, the same diets, maybe even taking the same medications, and one of them will form stones, the other one won't. What is that? What is that factor or that thing that predisposes that one person to getting stones?
Hmm.
And we all know people that I always tell people, my patients, there's no justice, because we all know people that have perfect lifestyles and diets and
Whatever
everything,
that
and yet
means.
they
Hmm.
get cancer and kidney stones, and there
Hmm.
isn't any justice. But all that means is that we need to understand better why they form and how they form. And then for the treatments, we haven't had like new treatments. I'm talking medical, not surgical
Hmm.
treatments for kidney stones in like 30 years. The drugs we're using now for certain things are the same that were used decades ago. Nutritional interventions now, we don't really know that much more. But what I think we need more research on is to understand who will respond to certain types of interventions and who won't.
Hmm.
And that's called phenotyping, and that's a real there's a call for that in every area of medicine these days, because we don't do a good job of that anywhere, but we should do it in kidney stones, because we spend months sometimes trying someone on something, and then they come back with another 24-hour urine collection months later, and we say, well, that didn't work. Well, all
Mm-hmm.
that time was spent on that medication that
We're
didn't work,
wasted.
or on that
Mm-hmm.
intervention, right? So if we could have hit the spot, on the first pass, that would have been the best thing. So
Mm-hmm.
I would say, because we don't know so much about the different types of kidney stones, because there's different types, people don't appreciate that, and
Even
why.
within each type, right? Like you mentioned the different types of calcium phosphate stones, right? Like people oftentimes don't realize there's different types of capstones or calcium oxalate stones or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. And they all
Mhm.
have differences in terms of their recurrence frequency and the hardness of the stone, which means surgically breaking it up is either easier or harder in certain cases. So, and then because of the treatment effects. And then I guess finally, research into why the incidence of kidney stones is increasing. So if your audience doesn't already know this, we we look back at history, and we look back, 100 years ago to now, and we know we can prove this, that the number of people with new kidney stones, that's called incidence, is rising. Why is that? It seems to be happening too fast for there to for genetic changes to have been the reason. If genetic changes usually form over millions of years of mutations.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is occurring over 100 years, and so what is it that's causing this? And what is it that's causing girls to have more stones than boys
Mm-hmm.
up until about the mid 20s or 30s, and then it reverses, and men have more stones than women, but women are catching up.
Increasing
It's
that. One
one
one unfortunate way that we're meeting men, catching up with men.
equity,
Yeah.
yes. And then
Yeah.
postmenopausal women have a big then rise in incidence and recurrence
Mhm.
again. So those
Yeah.
that bimodal sort of biphasic
Yeah.
dynamic, we don't know anything about that.
The area that I think is most shocking and the numbers are most alarming, and you'll know the exact numbers better than I, is the rate that they're increasing in children.
Yep.
That's astonishing. It's something like don't like 4 times over the last couple decades or something. Is that correct? Um,
Yeah. I guess I don't know the number either, but I'll
yeah,
buy that.
it's astonishing.
It's
Whatever it is,
market. Yeah. And that's, why there isn't, the changes in our diets have not been so
that
fast and
drastic.
so significant. Right. Right. So
Hmm.
there's something else going on.
Yeah, yeah. So much to know. And obviously, the more we know about how stones form and obviously the treatments, we'll be able to help you better, right? We'll be able to help you prevent kidney stones, hopefully on a population level, help less people have kidney stones, but those that have reduce their recurrence. Because obviously we know that that recurrence rate is so high. So, yeah, research is important. We need to fund
And
it.
they say people who are studying climate change. Also,
Hmm.
in kidney stone research, there are a few investigators, some of our colleagues, who are studying this, taking this on, and the data are pretty amazing.
It's
If
fascinating.
Yes, if the temperature heats up by a certain number of degrees throughout more of the country than, say, in the south, that automatically increases the risk for kidney stones.
Hmm.
So there's that as well. So
Yeah. So many different interesting aspects. We're biased, but
yeah.
yes. Yeah. So why kidney stones, Chris? Kind of backing up. Like why have you dedicated your entire career to primarily kidney stones? Why do you love them so much or hate that, why do you love working with this population so much?
Yeah, I think my story is probably similar to other people who find themselves not taking a straight path sometimes, but they find themselves in a place
Hmm.
that the journey led them. So yeah, I mean, I studied vitamin A for my PhD work. I was doing bench science vitamin A research. I was going to do a postdoc. I was going to, vitamin A deficiency is a huge problem in the developing world. It causes blindness and so on, and also immune function declines, so people are more susceptible to infections. I was studying vitamin A toxicity in pigs, and we were looking at how there's so much like fortification with preformed vitamin A in our food supply that it could lead to toxic. Anyway, I was really interested in that. But then I became a registered dietitian right before I entered grad school. And in order to sort of start my practice, I talked my professor into letting me out of the lab for 4 hours a week to go practice at the hospital. And the only clinic that was open for me to practice in, outpatient clinic, was the kidney stone
Oh, I can't
clinic.
believe it existed, quite
Well,
frankly.
Steve
And there was a
Nakata,
dietitian in it, I should say. Yeah.
Steve Nakata was I think, the first urologist to create a multidisciplinary stone clinic in 1995. And he
Oh.
recruited these two elderly nephrologists who were kind of at the end of their careers but interested in stones, and a dietitian. It wasn't me, it was a different dietitian.
Mm-hmm.
And then she left, and there was this opening. And so, as I said, I wanted during grad school to have a little bit of clinical practice to start that going. And so I worked 4 hours a week in this multidisciplinary stone clinic and finally got a PhD. But when I was doing my 4 hours a week there, the nephrologists were so generous with their knowledge, and they were just so excited about stones themselves
Yeah.
that it kind of infected me, and I became interested in it. And then I was in grad school, so I was also studying research methods and how to design studies and so forth. And I would go back to my clinical practice every 4 hours a week, and I would say, wow, we could study this. And it just became sort of a goal, actually, to do something more than just talk with patients about what they might be able to do in their diet. So when I finished the PhD, I was still intending maybe to go do a postdoc, but Steve Nakata, the chairman of the Department of Urology, said, well, gee, what if I could create a scientist position for you in our department? Would you stay? And I was like, well, sure. And, it took a year or so, but he did it. And that's when I landed in this sort of dream position of being able to be a clinician scientist. So I did like kidney stones after my exposure to it in the clinic. I did find it interesting. I think the renal metabolism and the renal handling of minerals and other things is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I love the compensatory work that the kidneys do. They're responsible for so many, for pitching in and saving us from so many different
Yeah.
things
We would die without
because
kidneys.
because
Yeah.
they can produce urine, right? And they can
Yep.
stuff the urine full of crap. So
Mm-hmm.
that intrigued me. And then the patients, you can't help but do, you know, those 5 years I was in grad school and not be touched by
Right.
the patients and some of their
Right.
stories and things. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that was
Oh,
what
cool.
started me in it, and never really been sorry since.
Yeah, I don't think I knew that. That's really quite similar to mine. I just kind of fell into a position at the University of Chicago because I missed academic medicine, and I was like, all right, I'll learn about kidneys, I guess.
Yeah.
And was fortunate to work also with some pretty amazing, pretty passionate people
Mhm.
when it comes to kidney stones, and it affected me, and here I am today.
I think it's
So,
a similar story when people really find they like something. Often it was because someone's other person's passion kind
mhm.
of influenced them. And so, yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. All right. So, transitioning into a little bit more of a tangible piece of our podcast episode today, as a general sense, because my listeners know I talk endlessly about the importance of 24-hour urine tests and really individualizing things. But from a general public health standpoint, which diets or foods or dietary patterns or however you want to frame it, are good for kidney stones?
So, such a loaded question, Melanie. And I know you're asking it that way because that's how people ask you
Yeah.
that question. But you and I know there's different types of kidney stones. So, whenever I get this question, what type of diet is good for kidney stones? My first question is, well, what type of stones are we talking about?
Hmm.
But I get what your question is. It's at a general public health, sort of level. Okay. So, first of all, not everybody, we don't typically practice primary prevention of kidney stones. So
Hmm.
it's not as if everybody walking around should be thinking, "Gee, I got to prevent kidney stones." But if you have a family history of kidney stones, and if you have a comorbidity that predisposes you to kidney stones, and there are some, then you should think about what you could do in your diet. Now, I always have to say, diet doesn't cause all kidney stones. And so even if your diet's horrible, no
Hmm.
matter what changes we make, if your stones are caused by something else, we
Hmm.
can make your diet perfect, but it ain't going to help your stones.
Hmm.
But if I were to say generally what the concept or what the best way to pursue a diet is, it's a balanced diet similar to a Mediterranean or a DASH style diet. And they're both characterized by, I'll just say, plant forward concepts. I think that's a good word to use. It
Hmm.
means you don't have to be a vegetarian, but you do got to sort of put them forward on your agenda, and whether it's fruits, vegetables, or whatever. And then making sure you're, being bladder friendly and kidney friendly and drinking lots of fluids.
Hmm.
And again, it doesn't just need to be water. It's not all about one thing,
Hmm.
but plenty of fluids, not avoiding dehydration, I guess I should
Yeah.
say, and eating plenty of fruits and vegetables and making sure you're meeting your micronutrient needs but not exceeding them. And
Mhm.
that's something most people I don't think appreciate about nutrition is that it's like this U-shaped thing.
Yeah.
We have a higher risk for adverse events at both the toxic and deficient levels. We
Hmm.
want to be in the middle of it at the bottom of the U. And so I find myself correcting both excessive consumption of
Hmm.
micronutrients as well as deficient consumption. So
Yeah.
being balanced, plan forward, not deficient but not excessive for micronutrients,
Yeah.
lots of water and other fluids.
Yeah, that's a great point about that sort of U-shaped curve with, toxicity and deficiency. Because I feel like, you know, if from a general sense, the best way to do that is to get nutrients from food.
Mhm.
Because as soon as you start implementing supplements, and there's certainly a time and a place for supplements, and right, don't get me wrong, but in general, I think we are a massively over-supplemented society. And when you introduce supplements, you are putting yourself at risk of that toxic side of things because you're taking a giant dose of something. That's the point of a supplement, right? And so I think as long as you're focusing on getting nutrients from food, which I feel like we've almost forgotten as a culture that we actually can get vitamins and minerals from food, and in fact, it's better in most cases. That's really the best way to make sure you're in the right range of that U shape and eating a well-balanced diet of all the different food groups, et cetera, et cetera.
I really agree with that. I do think there's a time and a place for supplementation. For example, if you are really low in something, there will be a need
Magnesium.
for, right, there will
Yeah.
be a need for
Mhm.
repletion. But then
Mhm.
after the repletion phase, when you are
Right.
adequately repleted, we can withdraw the supplement
Hmm.
or go on a lower dose. So people, I think, forget that once you're told to take something, you might not need to always take it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then people listen.
I get a lot of questions about vitamin D. And I feel like I often go into that a similar thing, right? Like if you're deficient, please, like,
Right.
like take the supplement. But the problem is people get left on these, especially vitamin D, like massive doses
Yep.
forever. And I think that is when they begin to become problematic when it comes to kidney stones, at least.
And when they are told by their providers, by their primary providers, or by someone treating them for osteoporosis
Take
or
calcium supplements.
a knee surgery, right? Take 1,200 milligrams of calcium every day
Right.
and 2,000 units of vitamin D. And it's like, don't you want to know how much they're getting from their foods first
Right.
before you say they should
Yeah.
have one dose of the whole amount they need in a day?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So diets good for kidney stones, lots of fruits, lots of vegetables, wide variety of things. Any other specific nutrients or groups of foods come to mind?
Well, people always want to know what should I avoid, and dietitians, as you know, we don't like that question so much. Although I would say we want to avoid salt-rich foods and added salt foods. Probably everybody should do that.
Yeah.
But there is a role for high salt in kidney stone formation. So I think low salt, and by simply of not by even you can use the salt shaker, but just avoid those really, really salty
Yeah.
processed
That's
foods.
not, we're not getting our salt from the salt shaker. It's
No.
the hot dogs and salad dressing. Yeah.
And the same thing with sugary foods. So,
Hmm.
like sugary beverages, those are the two things I would say, for my quality of life, I'm going to eat them once in a while,
Hmm.
but
Of course.
not every day.
Hmm.
And those are, I guess, two things I would put on the don't eat as often list.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that we don't do primary prevention of kidney stones, meaning, preventing kidney stones in people who haven't had one. However, I would say that the general dietary guidelines for Americans are
Mhm.
essentially a primary kidney stone prevention plan, just like it is
Yeah.
a primary prevention plan of most chronic diseases.
Yep.
Because it really like, if you don't have a history, we don't need to dive into the urine test and all these specific things. But if you're eating just like a general healthy diet,
Yep.
not eating a ton of salt and sugar, which we shouldn't be doing anyway,
Mhm.
getting in your calcium, drinking water, like that's the best thing that you can do to prevent stones and
I agree.
really any chronic disease.
The frustrating part is when people get the disease after they've adopted those healthy habits. And that's, I think, fully 50% of the patients I see, diet is not the cause of their stones.
Hmm.
Now, can I use diet to
Mitigate the risk
mitigate risk
factors.
factors?
Yeah.
Sure,
Yep.
but it's not the cause. And so when the
Hmm.
most frustrating patient is the one who comes in and they are already following the dietary guidelines for Americans or the DASH diet, and they're doing a great job. Their weight is great. I can tell they're really healthy, and they get stones. And they're going to need a medication. And they're like, but what can I do in my diet? That's
Yeah.
the most frustrating for me because the answer is nothing. You can't
Hmm.
do anything
Keep
different in
doing
your
what you're
diet.
doing, right? You're doing everything. Yeah.
That's right. And then I can say, maybe you would have had stones earlier in life had you not been doing
Right. Or
this,
bigger
and
ones, or
or
yeah.
bigger or more often. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I have to note that you mentioned nothing about oxalate in the last 10 minutes or whatever that we've been talking about kidney stone nutrition. However, if you Google what a kidney stone diet is, or I would say 50% of the hundreds of questions that I get from people is how much oxalate is in this food? Can I eat this food? Um, why didn't you talk about oxalate, Chris?
Well, first of all, not everybody forms calcium oxalate stones. That's one thing. Second of all, even if you do form calcium oxalate stones, only 20 to 30% of people do so because of anything to do with oxalate. So, in my mind, chances are oxalate is not going to be important for you to think about. Now, let's say it is. Let's say you're forming calcium oxalate stones, and let's say your urine oxalate is what we call high. We look at, kind of a cutoff sort of thing, or we look at it in a continuous fashion. Then people will often say, well, what should I cut out of my diet so I don't get oxalate? What people don't realize is that the oxalate in their urine is from both diet and what their body produces. And we can somewhat influence what our body produces, but not much. We can also influence the amount of oxalate from the diet, from the foods that we eat. We can influence how much we absorb. Dietitians call that controlling bioavailability, and we do it all the time. When we want to increase the bioavailability of iron, for example, especially the non-heme iron, we say have something with ascorbic acid or vitamin C in it at the same time. When we want to decrease the bioavailability of carbohydrates, we say
Right.
eat them with fat and protein and fiber so that it will dilute the effect on your blood glucose. Same thing, you can eat the healthy foods that have oxalate in them if we control the bioavailability, meaning your absorption of it. And we do that by simply pairing foods or beverages that have calcium in them when we eat the meals or those high oxalate foods.
Hmm.
That's it. The
Yeah.
calcium and the oxalate bind in the digestive tract. They are neither is absorbed if they're bound, and they're simply moved through the stool. And I always tell people I don't care if you have calcium oxalate stones in your poop, so that's fine. And then there's less to go in your urine.
Hmm.
Now, so it's a tricky thing because I think people like to sort of think that they need to cut out some foods. I know some patients who would love it if I said don't eat fruits and vegetables because they have oxalate in them. But, the truth is it's the healthy foods that have oxalate in them. It's nuts and seeds, it's whole grains, it's fruits and vegetables. And there is no way that anyone who is really knowledgeable would would cause your nutritional quality of your diet to be lower. When
Hmm.
when instead we simply can control the bioavailability of it.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't focus on oxalate, and I encourage people to give up their oxalate restrictions and instead to match their oxalate consumption with foods that have calcium, whether it's dairy or non-dairy.
Hmm. Yeah. I find that a lot of people are very afraid, understandably, right? Having a kidney stone is oftentimes a life-changing experience.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make any sense when I sit there and I say, okay, you've had a calcium oxalate stone, eat more calcium and eat oxalate. Like people are like, what? That doesn't make any sense. So a lot of times people will say, well, Melanie, why don't you say that we should follow a low oxalate diet just to be safe? Like I understand that I need to get in my calcium, but like why don't we do it just to be safe, to follow a low oxalate diet?
So interestingly, a low oxalate diet, although it's been probably recommended for decades, has really not been that well studied. So this is another area where we need more research. As far as I can tell, and I've looked in the literature, I have, because you and I've talked about this topic a lot. There's one randomized controlled trial that tested the effects in the urine, in other words, on kidney stone risk, of a low oxalate diet. And it did so by comparing people who were randomized to that diet versus the DASH diet, which is actually quite ample for oxalate and ample for calcium. The low oxalate diet, they just said don't eat high oxalate foods, and they didn't give them any other recommendations. Well, what happened was the punchline is that the low oxalate diet group actually increased their risk for kidney stones, for calcium oxalate stones, even though they had lower urine oxalate. How did that
How
happen?
did that happen?
Because when they cut out the high oxalate foods, they ate less fiber. So they absorbed more of the calcium in their diets. They ate less magnesium, and so they had less magnesium in their urine, and magnesium prevents calcium oxalate stones from forming. They had less alkali in their diet, and you and I have published a paper on this, but fruits and vegetables, which are the ones that they cut out on a low oxalate diet, provide what we call an alkaline load. And that's important for our urinary excretion of citrate. The more alkaline our diet, the more citrate we excrete in urine. And citrate is probably one of the most potent inhibitors of all types of calcium stones. So these patients on the low oxalate diet did have lower urine oxalate, but they had lower magnesium,
Hmm.
lower citrate, lower pH, and higher calcium.
Hmm.
And the folks on the DASH diet did have higher urine oxalate, but they had higher magnesium and higher citrate and higher pH,
Hmm.
and they didn't have the same calculated risk factor.
Yeah. And the same is true from in the Rodriguez paper that was published in 2020 that looked at the Mediterranean diet and people who followed that versus, well, they basically looked to see who formed stones and who didn't. And they found that people who formed stones were less likely to follow Mediterranean diet. And they had a subset of people who had 24-hour urine collections. And yes, the Mediterranean diet people who didn't form stones did have higher urine oxalate, but they also had higher citrate, higher magnesium, I believe, higher citrate, and all of the things that you just described, higher volume because fruits and vegetables also provide fluid. And
Good point.
so, sort of like just another study, and I'll link to both of these studies in the show notes to really demonstrate that this is why I fight back against the low oxalate diet restrictions because I truly believe I have an article actually on my blog about how a low oxalate diet could make kidney stones worse for these exact reasons. Um,
And
the
don't you think
exact
it
Go ahead.
goes too towards like, people want to reduce something to its simplest factor.
Well, it's easy. Eat this, not that, right?
But it's not, diet. We are whole people and we eat whole food, different chemicals. It doesn't make sense to me to pull one out or put one in.
Right.
We got to think about the whole picture.
Right.
And what you and I are talking about now in the urine in those two studies, they were looking at the whole picture, not
Hmm.
just the oxalate.
Yeah. Yeah. If we could reduce just oxalate in the diet, okay, I might be interested in that. But you can't. You cannot take out oxalate without also taking out all of those amazing things. And those things, ironically, are the exact things that we know are very beneficial for kidney stone prevention
Yeah.
and general health, right? Unfortunately, people with kidney stones are also at higher risk of high blood pressure and kidney disease potentially, and cardiovascular disease and other things. And these are the foods that we need to be eating just to keep us healthy in general. So,
Mhm.
yeah, when someone says to limit oxalate to 50 milligrams, the lowest I've heard is 30, which I would love to see that doctor put together a meal plan for that. But even 50 or even 100 milligrams, my heart just breaks because not only, and this is a whole nother topic, can you literally not quantify, you can't accurately count how much oxalate you're eating anyway, which is a whole different conversation. But you cannot put together a healthy even one single day diet plan with 50 or 100 milligrams of oxalate. It's just impossible to do, especially when you're trying to do that for the rest of your life in theory. And so, yeah,
Well, like you said, you can't really know the oxalate content of a food because it differs on where it's grown and on its maturity at harvest time. It's so many
how
factors.
it was
And
prepared. Hmm.
how it's prepared. And then imagine this, two people might be able to consume 100 milligrams of oxalate, but they're going to absorb it differently.
Hmm.
There's no two people whose digestive systems work exactly the same way in terms of permeability and absorption and digestion and all that. So there's so much variability. I just find it useless to talk about numbers of milligrams of
Hmm.
oxalate
Yeah.
because I can't predict that you're going to respond the same way to a load of oxalate as I will.
Hmm.
And since I know how we can just prevent the overabsorption of oxalate anyway, let's just do that.
Yeah. It's a lot healthier and more effective way to go about it
Well, and plus
anyway.
people restrict foods that are not high in oxalate. And that's another thing that always gets me. I had a woman patient who cried in my office as she was telling me that it's been 20 years since she ate a tomato or
Oh,
anything made of tomatoes, like tomato sauce. And I
it's
was like,
not even that
why
high.
in the world would you stop eating tomatoes? And she's like, well, because of the oxalate, of course.
Yeah.
And I showed her a list, a good list that was done by reputable investigators that showed the tomatoes not high in oxalate, and she continued to cry at her 20-year loss of tomatoes. So,
I hope she
yeah,
had a big plate of spaghetti as soon as she got home.
yeah. So
Yeah.
people, they'll restrict kale because they think somehow kale is high
Hmm.
in oxalate, just like spinach is, but it's
Yeah.
not. Yeah.
I've had people, more than one, ask if they could use like face creams and serums that have tea in them, like a green tea or something. Like, so, it goes, that fear just, it grows and grows and grows and impacts so many different areas. And it's so unfounded and truly,
Stressful
truly harmful
and stressful.
and
And how do
stressful.
we know
Yeah.
that stress doesn't cause kidney
I
stones,
mean,
you know?
there's data that shows that it's associated.
I
So,
know.
yeah. Yeah. Um, Yeah, so many reasons. There's so much more effective ways if you even have that high urine oxalate in the first place, which most people do not. Even if you do, in my experience, I would say 90% of the time I can get it down by just simply adding that calcium in. Would you?
Well, and the other reason to do more research, I spoke earlier about phenotyping. And let's also kind of put in there for the audience that not everybody with high oxalate has high oxalate because of their diet.
Oh,
Some
so
people
true.
have
Yeah.
high oxalate because they've been on antibiotics.
Hmm.
And the antibiotics have wiped out the gut bacteria that degrade oxalate for us. And
Hmm.
when that happens, we absorb more of our oxalate. So in that case, your oxalate intake can be pretty low.
Yeah.
But if you're absorbing every single bit of it because you got no bacteria that will degrade it, then it's really that's the problem. And that requires a different sort of an approach. And then there's some people who have high oxalate because we think they have more permeable digestive tract, lining or, whatever. So, and that could be due to inflammation or any
Hmm.
number of other causes. And then, as you know, there's people who form high oxalate because they genetically they're lacking an enzyme that prevents the overproduction of oxalate, and so that has nothing to do with their diet.
Yeah.
So it's
And
really coming.
hepatic production, liver production of oxalate. Have you seen, there's a case study published last year from Indiana. I think it was Sharon Moe had a patient who went on a carnivore diet,
Mhm,
and his oxalate went up. A carnivore
mhm.
diet, zero oxalate, literally zero, but it went up because of all of that excess protein. So it's a
Yes,
complicated thing. It's not
the
just dietary
the
oxalate.
precursor, yeah, those
Hmm.
precursors to oxalate, like vitamin C in high doses can cause that, not in the amounts you get from fruits and vegetables, but yeah, so there's not, I always say it's, play a little detective. If you're a
Hmm.
dietitian, understand why something is happening, because then you'll know what to do about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. That was a good segue into my next question about where do you think the future of kidney stone prevention is headed, or what area of research are you most excited about? I would love to hear your answer.
Hmm, good question. And we're not talking surgery, we're talking,
No, our worlds, kidney stone
medical
prevention,
nutrition.
nutrition.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I guess I'm excited to understand more about the liver. You mentioned liver
Oh,
production.
mhm.
I'm seeing a lot more fatty liver. And I see it in CT scans and x-rays and things that when I'm looking at a patient's chart, I'll always look at those things to see if they have stones. I want to know what their stone burden is. And I see that more diagnosed. And you will talk to people in the medical profession who concur. Yes, fatty liver disease is on the rise. And in fact, we don't even call it non-alcoholic fatty liver disease anymore. What do we call it? Metabolic
Oh yeah,
fatty liver disease.
something like that.
Anyway, it's becoming more and more of a problem. And I wonder if there's a connection because if your liver is not functioning correctly, and it could be from vitamin A toxicity or any other reason, fibrosis or fat stores, then it may not then handle or metabolize oxalate appropriately. And it could be that more oxalate is produced rather than less oxalate in those conditions. So that might explain a little bit of the increase.
Yeah.
Maybe this increase in kidney stones is because of underlying factors that we're not looking at.
Hmm.
I also, one of my patients is a cardiologist, and I love meeting him. He's noting more calcium vascularization or calcified vascular system, and he
Hmm.
believes it has a lot to do with overconsumption of vitamin D and calcium.
Hmm.
And you already talked about how that's rampant, and I concur. I think that's a potential area of study because if the calcium is converging in those vessels, it's probably got oxalate there, and
Hmm.
it's complexing with oxalate, maybe some phosphate as well. And then does that oxalate then get distributed into the blood somehow? And then renal excretion increases the urine oxalate.
Right. Interesting.
I, those are two sort of etiological factors that if we had more research dollars, we could really dive into that, and that might answer the questions we have about the rise of kidney stones.
Yeah. Not the gut microbiome. That's my answer.
So yeah, that was going to be my second or my
You're-
third choice, I guess. But I'm glad you said it because it's complicated. And, we used to think it was about just this one specific bacteria. And what I love about it now is that no, it's just as complicated as the rest of the human body. It's not
More
about one
complicated,
thing.
arguably.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
about networks of bacteria. And so, yeah. And again, that doesn't have relevance in all people's kidney stone disease,
Mhm.
but it might explain a good chunk of it.
Yeah, it's just a fascinating understanding in general the connection between digestion and kidney stones. Embarrassingly, before I fell into kidney stones, I like had no idea there was any sort of connection between the gut and kidney stones because I barely knew anything about kidney stones. But as I've learned more, it's fascinating how obviously how you are absorbing and digesting things is going to impact the end result of digestion, which is,
Yeah.
I mean, feces and your urine essentially. So, yeah, it's just a fascinating world to think about the gut microbiome and how that impacts oxalate and also the butyrate and inflammation and like so many different aspects. It's yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
The gut microbiome turns out to, and plus we have other biomes in our body. There's a urinary
Hmm.
biome, there's a kidney biome, and I always tell people it seems like we're just walking vessels for bacteria. Like they're really running us,
Yeah, it's kind of
because of
creepy, but kind of cool.
I know, but that gut bacteria, yeah, that's responsible for a lot of things, and maybe it is inflammation that that causes kidney stones, and that could be a big reason why it's increasing.
Yeah.
What foods contribute the most to a healthy gut microbiome?
Fiber, fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Chris. This has been fascinating. I'm sure our listeners are going to get so much out of this episode. And I imagine that many of them will be, like I am always, in awe of all of your knowledge and your expertise. And this is something I ask most guests that I have on my podcast because I haven't gotten a great answer yet. But how would you suggest people go about finding a true kidney stone prevention team? Um, because I feel like a lot of people find that they're not getting a whole lot of information from their urologist. And so what's your advice for how to um for people to help themselves and work with someone such as you or I?
Boy, I don't know if I can come up with any better answers than other people have. It is true that oftentimes it's a urologist that is the single source of information for a person with kidney stones. And some urologists say, don't worry about it, just come back and see me when you need another stone removed. The urologists I know, the good ones, they are, they want to prevent stones, and they try to give their patients information. But when they spend 5 or 10 minutes with a patient, they can't really do
There's no
much.
time.
So,
Yeah.
right. So I guess if there's not an interdisciplinary team available, like my team has a nephrologist and a dietitian and a urologist. You worked with nephrologists. If there isn't one, then perhaps the urologist or nephrologist, whoever the person is seeing, could refer the patient to a dietitian with knowledge about stones. Now that raises another question. I've had patients, and I'm sure you've had them too, who say to me, I went to a dietitian for stones and she didn't know anything about it.
Hmm.
And that's where they need to take a course like you have on diet for dietitians or learn more. I mean, we learned it
Hmm.
on our own kind of. So that you could create your own interdisciplinary team.
Hmm.
Or I think the other option is to become a detective and to really, really try to discern good information from bad information on the internet. Your information is on the internet. You've got a blog, and I love that oxalate thing you wrote. And so patients need to be careful though because there's so much crap on the internet. So
Yeah. We need to have a kidney stone specialist prevention certification in my book. I don't know how you feel about that, but like for,
Oh,
I don't know if it would be for doctors and or dietitians or urologists or nephrologists or whatever, but just for some way for patients to be able to identify a doctor who has that prevention expertise. I
that's
wish
a
that
really
that
good
existed.
idea.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
really good
Yeah. We
idea.
can talk later about
Okay, that's our next project.
excellent. But yeah, it's tough. And I think, I often encourage people to check for like looking at large academic medical centers. You're going to be way more likely to find sort of that stone prevention team. One silver lining in COVID is that a lot of times, especially for kidney stones, I feel like oftentimes those teams will see people virtually. And so if I was talking to someone who lived in sort of rural New York, and I was like, well, check out New York. They might be able to work with you virtually. And so really just kind of hunting and asking doctors, right? Like, do you consider yourself an expert in prevention? Like, what's your experience with that? So, it's tough, but do some hunting, and if you find a good one, stick with it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, we need better answer to that question, don't we?
yeah, we do. But it's an important one, so I always like to ask. Maybe
It
you have some
is.
secret that I don't know of.
No, but let's work on it.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you again, Chris, so much for your time. It's been a pleasure as always chatting with you. And maybe we'll have you back again for another podcast episode in a year or so to give us an update on hopefully all of the exciting research that's been going on in kidney stones.
Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for everything you do, and thanks for your passion. And yeah, it's great to find someone like-minded.
Yes,
And I think
there's not a ton of us out there that are
we
so
have found
passionate
each
about
other.
kidney stones. We did. We did. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, see ya.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. For more help with kidney stones, check out my website, www.thekidneydietitian.org. For more personalized help from me, check out my online course, Kidney Stone Nutrition School. VIP enrollment includes help directly from me. I can't wait to see you there and help you prevent kidney stones. Have a great day.